The zipper caught halfway up, and for a moment, I just stared at the mirror. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from something smaller, quieter. I tugged again, gently, carefully, trying not to wrinkle the fabric. It moved an inch, then stuck, just like my breath had when she handed me the dress earlier that morning. "It's simple," she'd said. "Soft blue. It won't draw too much attention." The room was silent now, except for the rustle of satin and the soft hum of the air vent above. Even the laughter outside the door, the clinking of mimosa glasses, felt distant. I stood alone, in a dress that technically fit, but felt like it belonged to someone else. The zipper gave out a little, finally, and I exhaled. My reflection didn't smile back. I smoothed the shoulders, adjusted the hem. I looked tidy, appropriate, but not. "Like me, need help?" one of the bridesmaids called from down the hall. "No, I've got it," I answered too quickly. And just like that, the moment passed, half zipped, half swallowed, halfway forgotten. She looked at me through the mirror, her expression pleasant but distant. A smile that met her lips, but not her eyes. "You look nice," she said, then turned to adjust her veil. I almost replied, "It's your day too." But the words curled back down my throat before they reached the air. There was no space for that. Here. She had made it clear. This was her moment. I was to keep things smooth, quiet, appropriate. She moved across the room with the grace of someone who had practiced joy but not invited it in. The room felt colder somehow, even in the morning sun. Outside, her friends were laughing, music drifting in like a different life happening just outside the door. I stood on the soft carpet, shoes pinching slightly, hands folded. A guest, a helper. Not the woman who sat through homework meltdowns and midnight fevers. Not the woman who raised her. Just a woman in a blue dress, smiling small for the mirror. The iron hissed softly as I pressed the bodice, steam curling into the sunlight near. The window? My palm moved slow and steady, smoothing each wrinkle like it might erase more than just fabric, like it could soften time. The scent of lavender starch rose around me, and just for a second, I was back in the hallway of our old house, ironing. Her Sunday dresses. She used to bounce in behind me, barefoot, hair half-brushed, asking, "Do I look like a cloud today?" I would spin her around, adjust her bow, kiss the crown of her head. She always wanted to look soft and floaty. That was her word. I ran my hand over the seam again, remembering how she once cried because I ironed a puff sleeve flat. Now she didn't ask. She just handed me the dress and walked away. I pressed, one more time, gently at the hem, and folded the iron down. The fabric looked perfect now, but perfect never did mean personal. She stood by the window, her back to me, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice floated lightly, laughing, bright, careful. I didn't recognize the tone, but it wasn't meant for me. She leaned slightly, one hand on the sill, her silhouette outlined by the morning sun slipping through the sheer curtains. Her heels clicked softly when she shifted, just once. Then, stillness again. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched her, not listening to the words, just the rhythm, that light, practiced laughter, polished, polite. I couldn't remember the last time she laughed like that with me. No stories, no jokes. "No, you won't believe what happened today." Lately, our talks had been checklists, reminders, questions about arrival times and what to wear. My hands rested on my knees. The pearls around my neck felt heavier than usual, like they remembered the girl who once gave them to me to hold forever. And now she barely remembered to speak. I reached into my purse to check my lipstick before we left the suite, my fingers brushing past the usual, tissues, mints, my old compact. Then something folded and soft at the bottom. I pulled it out slowly. A small note, torn from a journal, faded pink lines, corner slightly ripped. "You're my favorite person," it said, written in green glitter pen, signed with a little star. Instead of a name. She'd given it to me when she was 10. "So, you never forget," she'd said. I smiled, just barely. My thumb brushed over the crease. The paper felt soft from time, worn from being handled too much and kept too long. I thought for a moment about slipping it into the pocket of the dress, but instead I folded it again. I placed it carefully back in the purse and zipped it shut. This wasn't the moment for memories. I'd been told that in words and in silences. So I touched up my lipstick, smoothed my dress, and tucked my feelings away, quiet as always. The heels clicked outside the door. A bridesmaid's laugh echoed, and the scent of her perfume still hung in the air. I looked at myself one last time in the mirror. It wasn't the pale blue dress that bothered me, not really. It was the quiet request underneath it, that I fade, just enough to be present, but not visible. That I stand, but not too close. That I love, but only from a respectful distance. I would have worn anything. Green, pink, polka dots. I would have danced barefoot if she asked. I raised her through every storm, every heartbreak, every scraped knee, every late-night sob. But this version of me, this careful, quiet, muted me, wasn't the woman who taught her how to braid her hair before picture day. This wasn't me who stayed awake until she came home from prom. That woman didn't belong in the background. And as I stood there, I promised myself I'd find her again. Even if no one else in the room remembered her, I would. She used to tear out the front door like the world was hers. One pink sock, one blue, said matching was for people who were afraid to be fun. Her hair always half-brushed, shoes sometimes untied, laughter trailing behind her, like ribbon. I'd call out, "Slow down!" But I never really meant it. Watching her run like that made something in me feel lighter, like she was tugging the sun along with her. I can still see her skipping down the porch steps, giggling at nothing and everything. That laugh, bright and sudden, bounced off the railings, off the mailbox, even made the birds pause. She wore happiness the way others wore jewelry, not as decoration, but as declaration. We'd sit on the porch in the late afternoon, honeysuckle in the air, grass freshly trimmed. She'd twirl just to feel dizzy and call it a game. She didn't know it then, but every time she ran free like that, she gave me a reason to believe in joy again. I still do, because of her. She handed me that little purple diary like it was the crown jewels. "You can read it," she said, almost whispering, "but only if you read it out loud." So I did. Page after page about talking ponies, secret, crushes on weather anchors, and whether or not clouds had feelings. I read with my best dramatic voice, deep and serious when she wanted, silly and sing-songy when she'd giggle and say, "Again, Grandma." We were on the porch swing, lemonade sweating on the rail beside us, dusk settling like a blanket. The swing creaked gently beneath us, moving just enough to keep the mosquitoes away. She'd laugh so hard tears would collect under her freckles. "That one's my favorite," she'd say, pointing to some sentence I could barely understand. But I understood what mattered, that she trusted me with her world, that I was safe for her imagination to stretch out and be silly. And in those pages, I wasn't just reading her diary. I was holding her heart, gently, like something I never wanted to lose. She'd leap right up onto the coffee table, arms wide, eyes bright. "Watch me, Grandma." And before I could blink, she was twirling, socks sliding, hair flying, music not even playing yet. The world didn't have to invite her. She just showed up and danced. I never told her to stop, not once. I just clapped. Every time, popcorn half-finished on the couch, ceiling fan humming overhead, her stuffed animals lined up like a loyal front row. That little table held juice spills and crayon marks, but she treated it like a Broadway stage. Some kids ask permission before they take up space. Not her. She knew she belonged, and oh, how I love that about her. She made the joy loud, made the room brighter, made the rules feel like they were made of feathers. If I could have bottled those moments, her spinning in circles, laughing with no reason but being alive, I'd have kept them on a shelf, next to the popcorn bowls and piano. Music. She'd press her palms to the bedroom window, whispering so softly I could barely hear. "I hope you're listening tonight, Moon." She always taped little drawings to the glass. Crooked hearts, stick figures holding hands, stars with sleepy faces. Sometimes she'd hum as she worked, a tune made up on the spot. "Just in case the moon wants something to look at," she'd explain. I remember sneaking in after she fell asleep, tiptoeing across the carpet, slipping folded notes into her sock drawer. "Yes," I'd write, "I see your drawings. I love the ones with freckles." In the morning, she'd squeal and say, "Grandma, it answered me again." She never asked how, or why the handwriting looked familiar, and I never told. Because sometimes magic doesn't need explaining. It just needs believing. And watching her believe with her whole little heart, that was the real wonder. I don't know if she remembers now, but I do. Every word, every wish, every smile pressed up against that bedroom window. She told her second-grade teacher, "My grandma is my safe." I didn't hear it until conference day when the teacher leaned in and smiled. "She said she can cry in your kitchen," she told me. "That it's the only place where her tummy doesn't feel tight." I don't know why that moment hit me so hard, but it did. I remember the scent of cinnamon rolls that morning, dough rising in the oven, soft radio music playing under the hum of the fridge. She had wrapped herself around my waist while I stirred, her little face pressed into my apron, her breath warm against the fabric. No questions, no explanations. She just knew. There was something sacred about being safe, more than being her guardian. More than bedtime stories or school lunches, it meant I was her place to fall apart. And now, whenever the kitchen feels too quiet, I stand at the counter, close my eyes, and remember the weight of her small arms holding onto mine like home. If I close my eyes, I can still see her. Crown of construction paper on her head, glitter smeared across her cheeks, holding out a second crown and saying, "Come on, Grandma, let's both be queens." She wouldn't have hushed me. That little version of her would have clapped when I told a silly story. She would have laughed the loudest, pulled me into her made-up play, sat me on the coffee table and called it my throne. Now, she tells me to be careful what I say, to keep it simple, appropriate. But that little girl, she once said my laugh was her favorite sound. I miss her, not because she's gone, but because the world asked her to put that sparkle away, told her to be polished, quiet, normal. She obeyed, and I've tried to do the same. But some days, sitting on this porch, the cicadas loud, the chair creaking under me, I wonder, what would that girl say now? I think she'd hand me the crown again, just to see me smile. The salmon was warm, the air sweet with garden roses and something a little more artificial. Perfume, maybe. We sat at the long table under the fading sun, soft jazz weaving between clinking plates and the low murmur of conversation. I waited for a pause, just one. Then I smiled and said, "Do you remember your wedding to the moon?" A few heads turned politely. She blinked. "You glued macaroni to that little flower pot," I said, chuckling. "Wrapped yourself in a blanket and marched down the hallway with a flashlight like it was a spotlight." Someone laughed faintly. Her groom, maybe, but she just smiled, small, polite. "Oh," she said, "I barely remember that." It hit me right there. That story used to make her laugh so hard she'd snort and cover her face, freckles crinkling in delight. I'd told it at family dinners, and she'd beg, "Again!" But now she looked like someone humoring an old neighbor. I felt like I'd handed her a gift she no longer recognized, or wanted. She laughed, or something like it. It was the kind of laugh you use when you're being polite, quick, clipped. It ended too soon, like the sound had somewhere better to be. "Oh, right," she said, setting her fork down beside her plate. "That was silly of me." I smiled. Or Something like it. Then she turned, lifted her glass to her in-laws, who chuckled warmly at something I hadn't heard. Her hand found his, her husband's, resting gently on the table between them. No one looked my way. Not then. I sipped my water slowly, swallowed something that wasn't just salmon. I used to be her whole world, the center of every story she ever wrote in crayon and glitter pen. I used to be the one she clapped for across talent shows and sleepovers and muddy soccer games. Now I felt like a side note in her life. Maybe that's how it's supposed to go. But it didn't make the bitterness easier to taste, or the sweetness any less painful to remember. They laughed about a memory I didn't know, something about a trip to Asheville, someone falling in the river. Her father-in-law slapped the table with joy, and someone across from me wiped tears from her eyes. I smiled faintly, folded my napkin into a smaller square, then folded it again. I kept my hands busy, my voice still. I could have told them about her moon wedding, how she once tried to marry her pillow just to practice for someday, how she cried when the cake melted. But I didn't. They didn't ask, and she didn't offer. I looked down the table and watched her, so poised, so confident, the kind of woman people listen to, admire, and I realized I wasn't part of this version of her story. Not really. I was someone she trusted with her childhood, not her present. And maybe that's what growing up is. But oh, it felt like forgetting. She touched my elbow so gently, it startled me. We were away from the others now, stepping out onto the side path where lanterns hung low and warm. Gravel shifted beneath my shoes. "Hey," she said softly, still, smiling. "Can I ask something?" Of course. Her fingers lingered just a second longer. "Just try not to, go off script tomorrow." My heart didn't break. It just paused. "Off script?" I repeated. She laughed, like she was smoothing something over. No moon weddings, no silly stories. Just keep it light. It's simple. We want everything to go smoothly. I nodded, almost before I realized it. "Of course." "Thank you," she said, already turning back toward the lights. I stood still for a beat, hands at my sides. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even unkind. But it wasn't a request to show up. It was a request to shrink, and I'd spent a lifetime being the big love in her life. Back at the table, I reached for my glass, only to find it was already full. Someone had refilled it without me noticing. The conversation had shifted again. More stories, more laughter. I had so many more ready, stories tucked away like recipes I never got around to writing down. The time she dressed the dog in tulle. Her imaginary wedding registry that included a cotton candy machine and a trampoline altar. But I said none of them. I stared at my lap, at the soft blue dress she asked me to wear. I smoothed it out again. The fabric was lovely, plain, but fine. I wondered if my laugh would be too loud, if my joy might cause ripples, if who I once was might feel out of place. So I folded my napkin once more, sipped my drink, and tucked the rest of my stories where no one could hear them. Not tonight. She walked away, her heels clicking gently across the stone path, her shadow stretching long in the garden light. I didn't move. The hush of crickets rose around me, soft and rhythmic, like something old and unchanging. I didn't feel angry, just pulled, like a thread caught in the lining of an old sweater, tugged too far, too fast, puckering everything else around it. I hadn't expected a spotlight. I didn't need praise. But I also didn't expect to feel like an afterthought. A part of me, the part that rocked her through fevers and braided her hair for recitals, felt like it had been quietly retired. No ceremony, no thanks. Just a closing door. I looked up at the lanterns, warm, flickering, floating above the quiet garden, and for the first time all evening, I wished I were home. Not because I wasn't proud of her, but because I didn't recognize where I stood in the picture anymore. The sun was warm but not harsh, the kind of mid-afternoon light that paints everything gold. I walked slowly toward the seating area, careful not to trip on the garden stones. There wasn't a place card with my name, just a folding chair near the aisle. Not too close, not too far. It sat apart, like a placeholder. I placed my purse on my lap and adjusted my skirt, smoothing the fabric that had already started to wrinkle from the drive. The usher, a boy in a vest and too much cologne, glanced past me as he moved down the row. Not rude, just inattentive. Like I was part of the backdrop. The flowers, the fans, the breeze. I smiled anyway. That small, practiced smile you give when you've learned not to expect much. Behind me, silk rustled. A woman whispered to her friend about the peonies. The bees buzzed near the edge of the hedge. I sat very still. I wasn't meant to be noticed, just a present. And sometimes, presence is the loudest thing you have left. They turned back once, her new in-laws, smiling, polite, just enough to be civil. One of them nodded and said, "Oh, you must be the babysitter, right?" I smiled, that small, tight one, and said, "I helped raise her." Their eyes flicked away, and that was that. They didn't know I taught her to tie her shoes, with bunny ears and songs about loops. Didn't know I stayed up with her through chickenpox and her first broken heart. Didn't know she once told me I was her favorite person in the whole world, second only to the moon. They knew her now, the woman in white with the perfect hair and the practiced walk. But they didn't know the girl who cried when her hamster died, or the one who snuck chocolate chips out of the baking drawer when she thought I wasn't looking, and she didn't offer to tell them. So I stayed quiet, smiled faintly. Some truths are too big to explain in passing, and some hearts are too closed to hold them anyway. The music swelled gently, the kind that sounds like ribbon unraveling. I looked past the veil and lace and flowers, past the vows being whispered into microphones. I closed my eyes, and there she was, knees scraped, hands sticky from orange slices, eyes big and searching for me. "Am I bleeding?" she once asked, after tripping on the sidewalk. "Yes," I'd said, brushing gravel from her shin, "but not too bad." I kissed her forehead, and she smiled like it made the sting disappear. That's the girl I raised, the one who used to bring me dandelions, in fists too small to hold them all, the one who built blanket forts and cried when they collapsed. I opened my eyes. She was radiant, grown, laughing at the altar, holding someone else's hands now, and even though she looked beautiful, something inside me ached. Not because I lost her, but because I wasn't sure if she remembered that I was once her whole sky. My hands stayed folded, not clenched, not hidden, just gently resting in my lap, the way they do in church, or funerals, or courtrooms, places where presence is allowed. But voice isn't. People clapped when the officiant made a joke. Some stood when the bride kissed the groom. A few wiped tears from their eyes with the back of a hand. I didn't cry, I didn't clap, I just smiled. That quiet kind of smile, not bitter, not joyful, but rooted in something deeper than approval. Sometimes you learn that silence is your loudest language. That stillness can say what applause never could. I'd cheered for her for years. From the bleachers, from auditoriums, from across dinner tables where she recited poems about butterflies. Today, I stayed silent, because it wasn't my moment, but oh, how full my hands felt, resting still, carrying everything we had once shared. Woman in a headset asked, "Are you looking for the reception tent?" I nodded politely. She smiled. The catering crew headed that way. I opened my mouth to speak, to correct, but stopped. I followed the path anyway. Later, I checked the program, the names of her college roommates, her piano teacher, the couple from their neighborhood. Everyone was there, except me. Not a mention. Not even a line. I wasn't part of the story she chose to tell today, and I understand, I do. Life moves forward. People change, but I raised her. Through ear infections and multiplication tables and the slow heartbreak of middle school, and not seeing myself on that page, not being named, made something inside me fold a little. I didn't take it personally, out, loud, but deep down, it left a mark. The kind that doesn't bruise, but stays. I watched the vows, the kiss, the gentle exhale of the crowd. I watched it all, not from the front row, not as a guest of honor, but from the edge of the story. I didn't carry a bouquet, I didn't stand for photos, but I carried something heavier. Every bedtime, every goodbye, every moment that built the woman in white. And I showed up. I sat in the borrowed chair, wore the quiet dress, smiled when I wanted to ache. That's what love does. It shows up. Without needing to be asked, without needing to be seen, even when it's mistaken for help, even when no one saves a seat. Love shows up, and I did. From the back row, I showed up for her, just like I always had. The ballroom shimmered, gold linens, polished cutlery, glitter that clung to the air like perfume. I drifted quietly from table to table, not looking for anything, just moving. Champagne fizzed in flutes I hadn't been offered. Cameras flashed over shoulders I didn't recognize. People smiled at one another, clinked glasses, and whispered over centerpieces. No one looked twice at me. I passed the photo booth, the guest book, and the towering cake. My heels clicked too softly to interrupt anything. I wasn't invisible. Just unimportant. I ended up near the dessert table. Petit fours stacked like jewelry. Neat, delicate, too sweet for my mood. The scent of vanilla and something floral hung heavy in the air. I reached out, touched nothing. My heart felt like a hollow vase, still upright, still here, but long since emptied. There were people talking, laughing. Her laughter is somewhere in the mix, but not once did it pull me in. I stood alone among glitter and glass and reminded myself I'd shown up. Even if no one asked me to, he couldn't have been more than 20. Apron wrinkled, sleeves pushed up, a dusting of powdered sugar on his wrist. I'd seen him once or twice carrying trays, head down, polite. This time, he stopped. "Excuse me," he said, soft but clear. "You're her grandma, right?" I blinked. I opened my mouth, half expecting the usual, a compliment on the decorations or a question about the menu. But his eyes didn't slide past me. They stayed. I nodded slowly. "Yes, I am." He smiled. And it wasn't the kind people use out of habit. It was real, warm, kind, and I felt it, the difference. Most people that day hadn't really looked at me. Not deeply, not directly. I was a fixture, a chair filler, background. But he paused, saw me, and in that moment I stood a little straighter, not because I needed to, just because someone finally gave me the space to. He said it gently, like he was giving something back. "She told me you raised her." The words floated between us, soft and steady. But inside me, something cracked open like a window finally unstuck. I hadn't known she told anyone. I'd wondered if she'd written me out, smoothed over the years I patched together with nickels and casseroles and tear-streaked lullabies. But this young man, a stranger, knew. She said you were the one who made her lunches, taught her how to drive, helped her memorize poems for school. I didn't answer right away. I just nodded. Because words, my words, weren't ready yet. It was strange. The room hadn't changed. The music still played, the candles still flickered, and laughter still came from somewhere behind me. But it felt warmer, because someone had remembered, and not just anyone. Her. She remembered, enough to say it out loud, and to someone who listened. It started in my chest, that smile, Small, but full. Not the kind I'd practiced all night. Not polite, not reserved. This one came from somewhere older, deeper. I smiled at him, really smiled, and said, "Thank you." He gave a small shrug, like it was nothing. Like he didn't know what he'd just done. My shoulders eased, my hands relaxed. I hadn't realized how stiff I'd been until that moment, like I'd been holding a posture no one asked me to hold, just to stay out of the way. "You're welcome," he said, already turning toward the kitchen. But I stood there a moment longer, watching him walk away through silver and shadows. I wanted to tell him that I'd spent the entire day waiting to feel like more than a seat number. That sometimes the smallest kindness feels like being remembered by the world. I didn't say any of that, but I hope he felt it in my smile. The room hadn't grown colder, but I realized I had. Not angry, just braced. I'd spent years standing, at the edge of conversations, offering help, giving space, stepping aside. All those times I'd been labeled extra, supportive, quiet. I thought it hadn't changed me. But that night, with one soft voice, one honest moment, I felt something thaw. It was like someone had placed warm hands on my heart and said, "It's okay. You can come back now." The music slowed. Couples danced in gentle sways, golden light pooling on the floor like syrup. The air smelled like melting wax and champagne. I closed my eyes, not to escape, but to let it settle. His voice, that sentence. It loosened something that had been wound too tight for too long. Sometimes we don't realize how cold we've grown until someone reaches for us gently. That boy's kindness didn't shout, it whispered, and it was the first real thing I'd felt all evening. I stood near the wall as the room dimmed. Candles burned low. The music softened, now just a quiet heartbeat under the chatter. No spotlight. No microphone, just one sentence still ringing in my ears. He called me grandma, not guest, not +1, not the babysitter. He said it like it meant something, and somehow that word, from him, echoed louder than it had. From her all day. I don't blame her. Weddings get busy, speeches run long, things get forgotten, but I hadn't forgotten, and in that moment, neither had he. That boy reminded me who I was, not just to her, but in the story I lived to tell. Sometimes, the people who don't know your whole journey still speak your truest name, and that's enough to carry home, enough to stand a little taller, because being seen, really seen, doesn't require the whole room, just one voice, saying it like it matters. The hallway was dim, lit only by that old wall sconce that flickered sometimes, like it remembered, more than it gave light. I stood there with my hand on the knob, not turning it, just standing, listening to the soft patter of rain on the roof and the distant, tired rumble of thunder. It had been years. When I finally opened the door, the smell was the first thing that greeted me. Lavender and a trace of dust, soft and familiar. The air felt still, like the room had been holding its breath too. Her room looked exactly the same. Bed neatly made with the quilt we stitched together one summer, posters slightly peeling on the walls, that old stuffed giraffe slouched in the high corner, still smiling, and yet everything was different. I stepped inside slowly. The floor creaked under my feet. My chest ached in that quiet, full way that comes when something long held finally exhales. It was like walking into a memory that remembered me back. Her bookshelf stood just as she left it. Tidy. Proud. She used to reorganize it every few months. By color, then alphabet, then theme. She'd narrate the whole process like a librarian on a mission. Red books are dramatic, she'd once declared. Blue ones are sad, I reached out and let my fingertips drift across the spines. Dust clung to my skin. Each book felt like a secret she once trusted me with. I could still picture her standing on a chair, ponytail lopsided, arms crossed, deciding which book deserved the top shelf. I didn't touch any of them, not even to straighten the one that had leaned slightly to the left. Some things you leave exactly how they are. The rain tapped gently against the window, and a cool breeze slipped through the cracked pane, carrying the smell of wet leaves and old paper. It felt like time had curled up in this room and decided to nap. And I, quietly, sat beside it. The box sat where it always had, just at the edge of her bed, half tucked beneath the quilt I made her. Its corners were worn soft, the lid slightly bowed. I eased it open. There they were, her ballet slippers. The satin had dulled, and one ribbon was starting to fray. But they were still looped in that careful way she used to do. Tongue out, fingers focused, whispering, "Grandma, watch this knot." I lifted one slipper gently, like it might crack. The toe was scuffed, the sole still curved from her foot. I could almost hear the creak of the studio floor, the squeak of rubber against wood, the giggle she'd try to hide every time the teacher said, "Plié." I remembered rubbing those tired feet after recitals, painting her toenails while she snacked on animal crackers. I held that slipper for a long time, because sometimes love lingers in the places where little feet once landed and never truly left. I opened the top drawer of her desk, slow and careful. It creaked, that same soft sound it always made when she'd sneak candy out or hide her birthday money from. Her cousin's, tucked beneath a stack of faded stickers and a dried-up gel pen, was her diary, pink, with a tiny heart-shaped lock that had never really worked. I lifted it out. The cover was soft now, worn down by time and probably the weight of 1,000,000 secrets. A corner of it still had glitter, barely, from one of her old-school projects. She had handed it to me once, solemn-eyed, no older than 9. "Keep this safe," she'd said, "in case something ever happens to me." She never asked for it back. I sat at her desk, the rain still pattering gently against the glass, and held it to my chest for a moment. She trusted me with her little world, and I kept it, exactly as she asked. I sat on the edge of her bed, the diary open in my lap. The early pages were all hearts and loops, written in every colored pen she owned. Exclamation marks at the end of nearly every sentence. Doodles of stars, flowers, stick figures dancing on the margins. She wrote about her imaginary bakery, about her favorite band, about how her teacher definitely had a crush on the gym coach. But somewhere in the middle, the handwriting changed. Though, letters got tighter, neater, less sparkly. It was like her joy had started asking permission, like the world told her she needed to earn her sparkle instead of just wearing it. I ran my thumb across the page. No big moments. No dramatic line. Just a soft shift from wonder to caution. I wondered when she stopped telling me everything, when life became something she kept instead of something she shared. The thunder rumbled low outside, and inside I felt the hush of something lost, but still remembered. I turned a page, and there it was. "Dear Grandma," it began. Not about me, to me. The ink was a little smudged, like her hand trembled when she wrote it. She was 12, maybe. She'd drown a little heart next to my name. "I'm sorry I yelled at you last week," she wrote. "I was mad about dumb stuff. I always feel better when I smell your kitchen." My throat tightened. She wrote about how safe she felt when I read to her at night, how she still sometimes whispered to the moon, how she hoped I would live forever, or at least until I'm a grown-up. She never gave me this page, but she wrote it, and that mattered more. The rain had slowed now, just a soft whisper against the pane. The lamplight wrapped around me like a shawl. She hadn't said it out loud in years, but she remembered me. In the eye. Place she felt safest. And that was enough. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains, soft and golden. I stood in front of the mirror and reached for the dress. Sunflower yellow. The same shade she used to say made her feel like summer when she was 10. Back then, she'd twirl in it, arms wide, shouting, "I'm a sunbeam, Grandma." I slipped it over my head slowly, smoothing the fabric with both hands. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't trendy, but it held a memory, one only I had kept safe. I didn't wear it to be noticed. I wore it so that if she looked my way, even for a second, she'd see something familiar, something warm. The scent of citrus perfume lingered in the room as I fastened my earrings. Outside, a bird called through the open window. The world was waking up gently, and so was I, in my own quiet way, holding on to the girl who once picked this color because it felt like laughing. I wore it for her, to say I still see you. I didn't bring a gift bag, no bow, no card, just her diary. The one she gave me at 9 with strict instructions. Don't peek, but don't lose it. I never did either. I tied it with a yellow ribbon, the same one she wore in her pigtails. That summer she lost her first tooth, a soft, fraying thing that somehow still held its shape. The table was crowded with boxes wrapped in silvers and creams, paper rustling with every eager hand. But the diary sat bare. On purpose, because truth doesn't need dressing. It just needs to be seen. I placed it gently in my bag and carried it like something sacred, not heavy, but important. She might not have remembered it, but I did. Every page. Every scribble. Every little drawing of stars and hearts with initials inside them. It wasn't just a book, it was a reminder of before. Of a bond we hadn't spoken of in years. I brought no gift that day. I brought a history only she and I could read. I waited until no one was watching. The brunch was in full swing. The clinking of champagne glasses, the low hum of laughter, the smell of pastries and fresh-cut fruit drifting through the air. I moved to the gift table slowly, careful not to draw attention. It was crowded with boxes and bags in every shade of beige and blush. I reached into my purse, pulled out the diary. Fingers hesitated on the ribbon, not for drama, just for a breath. It had lived in my drawer for over a decade, tucked beneath receipts and recipes and letters I never mailed. I laid it down in the center, no tag, no inscription, just the ribbon. Just us. For a moment, my hand lingered. Then I stepped back. The napkins fluttered beside me from the breeze. A woman nearby laughed at a joke I didn't hear. No one noticed what I'd left, but I did. And that was enough. Her eyes swept the table once, casually, until they caught. I saw the pause, the ribbon, the pink cover. Her mouth didn't move. Her shoulders didn't shift. But her eyes flickered. A flicker I knew like my own reflection. One heartbeat is too long to be confused, too short to be full recognition. She looked up across the veranda, found me near the edge of the room, half sitting. On a bench, hands folded, we locked eyes. She didn't smile. Neither did I. But I offered something steadier. A small, even look. Not angry, not pleading. Just present. She didn't come over, didn't say a word, and that was all right. Some messages don't need words. Some memories carry their own voice. And I knew, even if she wouldn't show it then, the message had landed, like a letter sealed long ago. Finally opened. Someone opened a set of serving spoons with a wide smile. Another guest laughed over a blender with too many settings. The table rustled with wrapping and ribbons, all the usual sounds of a gift-opening brunch, but no one touched the diary. No one asked about the yellow ribbon. It sat quietly, tucked between a gravy boat and a set of nesting bowls, unwrapped, unread, and I let it. That's the thing about history. It doesn't clamor for attention. It just waits, quietly, for the right eyes, the right hands. I glanced at it once more, Before turning back to my untouched plate, the mimosa in my glass had gone warm. The sun glowed on the veranda, painting shadows under chairs. Conversations carried on, and still, the diary waited, because the ones who needed to notice it already had. I didn't bring measuring cups, or linens, or champagne flutes. I brought something far older, a worn pink book, a yellow ribbon, a handful of memories pressed between pages in a child's uneven handwriting. I brought her back to herself, the version of her who made up songs about pancakes and believed glitter was magical. It wasn't just a gift, it was us, before all. The quiet, before the distance. When she used to crawl into my lap and ask me to read her own diary aloud, I left it there, on the table, among the toasters and the coasters and the crystal. I didn't push it forward. Didn't explain it, I just left it, let her decide. Whether to unwrap it with her hands or her heart, that part wasn't mine to control. But I brought it, and maybe that was my real offering, not just the diary, but the chance to remember who we used to be and who we might still be if she chose to open it. The phone rang just once. I was already reaching for it, my hand halfway there before I even heard the sound. I didn't realize how tightly I was gripping the receiver until I lifted it, my fingers a little numb, my heart even quieter. "Hi," she said. That was all. No lead-in, no nervous laugh, no apology tucked between words, just that one syllable. Soft and clear, but something in the way she said it made the air in the kitchen still. The refrigerator hummed behind me, blending with the rustle of leaves outside the open window. A breeze drifted in, carrying the smell of rain-dampened grass. I leaned my hip against the counter. "Hi," I said back, matching her tone, not breaking. The moment. It felt like we were both holding something fragile between us. Not glass, not guilt, just possibility. And I didn't want to rush it. That one word was enough to stop time for a breath. Sometimes you don't need more. Just the courage to make the call. She didn't speak right away, and when she did, her voice was quiet, bare, like feet against hardwood. "I read what I wrote about you." That was all she said. But the pause after the sentence was longer than the sentence itself. Her voice caught, right on the word you, like it surprised her. Or like she hadn't said it with meaning in a long time. I imagined her sitting cross-legged somewhere, maybe on her bed, maybe on the floor. The diary open, pages bent with time. I imagined her thumb brushing over a sentence she once wrote. Without thinking, and now couldn't read without feeling. Curtains pulled. A soft lamp. Evening shadows stretching along the floor. She didn't dress her words in explanations. She didn't offer context or memory, just those 8 simple ones. I read what I wrote about you, and suddenly, I wasn't in my kitchen anymore. I was with her, in the quiet, in the softness, and something in both of us had just started to open. She said it so quietly I almost missed it. I forgot how much I loved you. Not in anger, not with shame, just with truth. And that sentence, so small, so undone, didn't need anything else. No paragraphs, no backstory, no reaching for how to fix what had been silent for too long. I didn't speak right away. I didn't even move. I just held that sentence like a photograph, one of the faded ones that you don't frame, but keep inside a drawer because it holds something you still feel. My eyes stung a little, but I didn't cry. I just stood in my kitchen, the golden hour light stretching across the counter. The kettle was still warm on the stove, untouched, waiting, like me. Sometimes when someone finally tells the truth, you don't need to say a word. You just let it settle, and that's what I did. I let her words hang there, finally home. Found my voice in the quiet, not hurried, not heavy, just soft. I never did forget, and I hadn't. Not through the quiet holidays, not through the texts that felt like errands, not through the birthdays spent on opposite ends of a phone. Remembered the freckles, the stories, the diary. I remembered her. My love didn't need to be asked to show up. It just waited, silently, patiently, for the moment it was welcomed again. And when she said she forgot, I didn't take it personally. I took it as a chance. The hallway light clicked on behind me, faint yellow casting a soft arc across the key tile. The kitchen still smelled like the banana bread I baked earlier, even though it had already cooled. I closed my eyes for a second and smiled. Some people think love needs big speeches, but sometimes it just needs one reply. Steady, true, and waiting right where you left it. After that, we didn't talk much. She stayed on the line. I stayed on mine, just listening to each other breathe. There were no big declarations, no fixing, no sudden plans for brunch or reunions, just silence. That soft, sacred kind that stretches, like a porch swing after you've stopped pushing. Her breath came in slowly, like she didn't want to leave the quiet either. I leaned against the counter, pressing the receiver to my ear. The fridge hummed behind me. Outside, the sky was deepening into blue, the kind that melts into indigo without asking. We didn't need to fill the space. We'd said enough. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is just stay. Stay in the silence. Stay on the line. Stay in the moment without rushing to finish it. So that's what we did. Just stayed, breathing the same quiet air. Across a phone line, across years, across all the words we hadn't said until now. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't say, "Come home." But I didn't need those words, because in her voice was something I hadn't heard in years. Softness. Like a door that hadn't been used in a long time quietly opening again. Not loudly, but fully. It was in the way she didn't rush to end the call. In the way she let the silence stretch, like she was afraid to break it too soon. It was enough. More than enough. The kitchen clock ticked behind me, slow and sure. Outside, the breeze caught the curtain by the window, lifting it slightly, just once, like it was breathing with us. The light was nearly gone now, the last bit of day folding itself into the dark. I stayed there a little longer, because I knew, even without the invitation, even without the hug or the words, she had let me back in, not as a memory, but at her home. It was a quiet Sunday, the kind where the house feels like it's holding its breath. The fire had just started to crackle, and the smell of cinnamon tea and pine wood lingered in the air when I heard the knock. Soft, not urgent. "Hi, Grandma," she said when I opened the door. No warning, no text, just her voice, and a man, standing behind her, holding a pie like it was part apology, part peace offering. He stepped into my living room like someone entering a library, eyes wide, feet slow. He looked around, not just at the books and the photos, but at me, not past me, not through me, at me. "This is nice," he said gently, and it was, the kind of nice that makes you want to sit a little longer. I didn't know why they'd come, not exactly, but the way she stood beside him, hand lightly on his arm, it told me enough. They weren't just visiting, they were listening, and maybe, for once, I'd be allowed to speak. She sat down on the couch across from me, her coat still, unbuttoned, the fire warming the air between us. The pie sat untouched on the coffee table. He looked around the room like it had a story to tell. She reached into her bag without a word and pulled out the diary, that old pink one. The cover was a little faded now, the spine cracked from years of being opened and closed by small hands. And steady ones. She looked at me, held it out. "Read him a page," she said. No teasing in her voice, no eye roll or half laugh. Just trust. My fingers trembled as I took it. Not out of fear, out of reverence. The last time I held that diary, she had asked me to keep it safe, and now she was asking me to open it. The fire popped softly in the background. The clock ticked once. He didn't say anything. "Just wait." And in the quiet of that moment, I knew I'd been given something sacred, not the book, but her invitation. I opened the diary like it had been waiting for me all this time. There were so many pages I could have chosen. The one about her, imaginary dog wedding. The one about her best friend who moved away. The one where she described the smell of my chicken soup in 11 different ways. But I knew the one I needed. Page 23. Her 9-year-old handwriting, large and a little crooked. Grandma says love is what you do, not just what you say. I read the line once in my head, then aloud. He leaned in, elbows on his knees, listening. I turned the page. She had doodled. Hearts around the words, one with an arrow through it, one lopsided like it couldn't quite hold its shape. I kept reading, slowly. It wasn't about performance. It wasn't about her past. It was about what she had believed once, what I had given her without even knowing. Love in action. Love passed down. Love written in pencil and now spoken aloud. The words came slowly, but not timidly. For once, I didn't soften my voice to fit the room. I didn't look down between sentences. I didn't wait for permission in her eyes. I just read. And when I paused between lines, I let the silence settle, soft as dust in a sunbeam, full of everything that didn't need to be said. The firelight danced across the spine of the diary, making it glow in a way that felt just right. She watched me, not to correct, not to rush, just to see, and that made all the difference. I wasn't reading to entertain or impress. I wasn't the afterthought or the extra chair at the table. I was part of the story again. My words filled the room, but not in a loud way. In a way that lingered, and when I finished, I closed the diary gently, like it was a child going to sleep. For once, I'd said everything I needed to. He didn't say much when I finished, just looked at her, then at me. And then he smiled. Not the kind that says, thanks for sharing, but the kind that says, I heard you. It wasn't big, it wasn't performative, but it was real. He nodded once, that was all, and something shifted. The room didn't feel so formal anymore. In the space between us didn't feel so wide. I wasn't just a photo on the wall or a story she told to fill the quiet. I was her beginning, and he knew that now. The tea beside us had gone cold, but none of us moved. The fire crackled. The shadows on the floor stretched a little longer, and I breathed in that moment. One where I wasn't a title or a role. I was just seen. She didn't say much as the night settled around us, but as she stood to go, she hesitated. Then, without a word, leaned her head gently against my shoulder. For a moment, I didn't move. Didn't say a thing, because that moment, that silent, weighted gesture, said everything. It wasn't just gratitude, it was recognition. It was her telling me, you were right, you were there, you mattered. I had spoken that night not just for her childhood, but for all the quiet years that followed, for all the times I was asked to shrink, for the love I gave without asking for a receipt. And in that one leaning touch, her cheek against my shoulder, her breath soft and steady, I felt something heal. The fire had died down to a low glow. The cinnamon still lingered in the air. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just breathed, and in that stillness, I was not just heard. I was held. The first time she called just to talk, it caught me off guard. No grocery list, no favor, just, hey, Grandma, I'm trying to decide something, and I don't know what I feel yet. She didn't need advice. She just needed space to say it out loud. Now she calls often, not every day, but often enough that my heart recognizes her ringtone before I do. The calls come during walks or late evenings, or while she's stirring something in her own kitchen. And when she says, "What do you think?" It's not an invitation to fix, it's a thread, another stitch pulling us close again. Tonight, the kitchen window was cracked just enough to let the crisp breeze in. The broth on the stove simmered gently, cinnamon thick in the air. Her voice blended into the sounds of home. I didn't lead, I didn't guide, I just listened. And in that small, steady quiet, I felt what I hadn't in years. She trusts me again, and that's more than enough. This Thanksgiving was different. I walked in holding a pumpkin pie and something softer, a piece I hadn't carried with me in years. The house was full, people I knew and some I didn't, laughter bouncing off the walls, chairs scraping, wood floors, hands reaching across the table for seconds. But this time, there was no edge to it, no stiffness, no pretending to be smaller than I am. She moved through the kitchen, graceful, calm. Her hair tucked back, her sleeves rolled up, humming, to music I couldn't place. And when our eyes met across the room, there was nothing to fix between us. Just knowing. The dining room glowed with candlelight, flickering on glassware and stories being shared mid-bite. The scent of rosemary and brown sugar lingered in the air. Time didn't rush. It moved gently, like honey warmed in a pot, and my girl, once wild, then distant, now stood right in the center of it all, steady as I had always hoped she'd become. Midway through dinner, someone realized there weren't enough seats. There was a quick shuffle, a search for the missing place. I stayed quiet, already preparing to offer mine up. Old habits. But before I could speak, she stood and walked to the hallway closet. No fuss, no announcement. She pulled out a folding chair, the old metal one with the squeaky hinge, and unfolded it next to her. "This one's yours," she said, her hand lightly on the back. "Always." Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. I walked over and sat down slowly. The cushion was thin, but my chest felt fuller than it had in a long time. She didn't just make space. She remembered I needed one. And that quiet gesture, no speech, no show, let something settle in me that had been adrift for years. A place. A pause. A belonging I didn't have to earn. I passed the gravy like I'd always done. But this time, my hands didn't tremble. I told a story about her as a child, one that made the whole table laugh, including her. Not politely, really laugh. No one corrected me. No one shifted uncomfortably. No one looked at her first for permission. I sat fully in my seat, not shrinking. I reached for seconds. I asked someone to pass the bread. I made a comment about how the yams could have used more cinnamon, and someone across from me nodded in agreement. I was part of the rhythm. Again, conversation flowed around me, not over me, and I didn't have to tiptoe between silences. Outside, night had fully settled. The candles on the table burned low, their wax curling slowly down the sides. Inside, I breathed easier, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a visitor in a story I helped begin. I just felt family. The chair wasn't elegant. It squeaked a little when I shifted, and its legs wobbled on the uneven floor. But that wasn't the point. It wasn't the chair that made me feel seen. It was the thought, the way she remembered I was there. The way she didn't hesitate or delegate. She got it herself, choose it, placed it next to hers. She could have filled that seat with anyone, a neighbor, a friend, another relative with a louder voice, but she didn't. She saved it for me. No announcement, no extra cushion, just a gesture full of history. I looked around the table. The plates were mostly empty now, the tablecloth rumpled with use. Someone poured the last of the wine. Someone else reached for the last roll, and she smiled at me across the candles. Not big, not grand, but knowing, and that kind of love, the kind that remembers quietly, doesn't need to raise its voice. It just shows up and opens the door. Used to think love meant making myself smaller, letting others shine, keeping my stories tucked away so theirs had room to grow. I did it for years. Sat at the edge of rooms, smiled without taking up space. But now, I know better. Love doesn't ask you to shrink, it just asks you to stay, even when it forgets for a while, even when it misplaces your name in the program or leaves your seat, unmarked. It hopes, quietly, patiently, that you'll still be there, that you'll wait close enough to be remembered. And tonight, as the last bit of pie was passed and the candles flickered low, I felt something shift. Not because I was asked to give, but because I was welcome to stay, no spotlight, no grand gesture, just a chair, and the unspoken knowing that I helped light this room once, and they finally saw the glow again. If you've ever waited quietly for someone to remember where you belong, then maybe you understand what that folding chair meant to me. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to have you here and hear what moments brought you back to the table.